along with speaking about history, this evening we will discover how poetry transforms history into human experience. I'll begin by inviting Mr. John Guzlowski. I have your poems. I read the poems in their Hindi translations in this book, and your poems arise from the memories of parents who survived Buchenwald, yet they never become merely historical documents. So my first question to you is, your poems preserve memories that many families found too painful to speak about. Did writing these poems ever feel like an act of healing? Or was it more an act of witnessing?
I think it was more of an act of witnessing, and I think it was something I inherited from my father. My father could not stop talking about the war. From the time I was 5 or 6 years old, my father would tell me stories about the things that he had experienced in Buchenwald and the things that my mother had experienced being taken to the slave labor camps. I remember being 6 years old and having my father tell me about women having their breasts torn off by bayonets, friends of his being castrated and crucified in Buchenwald. And it was something, my father could never stop talking about that stuff. My mother would ask, my mother seldom talked about this. And I think she didn't talk about it because she was trying to keep those memories buried because they were such troubling memories. But my father couldn't stop talking about it. And I think I inherited his need to talk about that. And I think that's one of the things where my poetry comes from. And also my poems about my parents. I mean, what I love about my poems about my parents is that when I write them and when I read them, my parents are there with me again. My father died in 1997. My mother died in 2006. They've been gone for a while. But when I read the poems, especially if I'm reading the poems in a situation like this in a Zoom, or I'm standing in front of an audience reading the poems, and my parents come back to me as I'm reading these poems.
Right. Would you like to tell us a little more about how these the origins of these poems? How these poems, what were you going through when you began writing about these?
It's an interesting question. I had no desire to write about my parents. I first started writing about them when I was 31 years old. What I wanted to write before that is I wanted to write comic books. I wanted to write science fiction novels. I wanted to write mystery novels. I wanted to write anything but things about my parents. And then I was in graduate school working on my dissertation on postmodern fiction. And one day, suddenly this poem popped up into my head. And it was a poem about what my parents were thinking about that very moment. They were, far away from me in the city of Chicago, 150 miles away. And I started imagining what they were thinking. And it became a poem about their memories about the Second World War. And that was the first poem I wrote about them. Like I say, I was 31 years old. And for the next, it never stopped. I'm still writing poems about my parents. I've written 3 books about them. I'm working on another book right now called What My Parents Taught Me. and it's new poems about my parents and about what they taught me. And
Right.
once I started writing about them, I really never stopped. In fact, let me just say this: they appear in one of my mystery novels. My parents' fictionalized version of my parents appear in one of my mystery novels. So they're everywhere in my writing.
Right. Many readers today know the horrors. People like me, for example, we come to know about the horrors during the war primarily through history books. What can poetry reveal that history alone cannot?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think what history books tell us. I read a lot of history books, and I also read a lot of memoirs of people who were in concentration camps, who fought in the war. What history books give us are the details of the war, but very seldom do they tell us about the suffering of war, the grief that people are experiencing during war. Memoirs and poetry, I think, give us that in ways that the history books never do. And like I say, I read a lot of history books and a lot of memoirs about the war, and that's what I've found is the personal writing about war can give you a sense of the horrors of war in ways that the history books can't do it. Even the good history books.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Guzlowski. I think that really says why we need to listen to poetry as much as reading history. So we will straight go to your poems. Yes.
Let me just say one thing.
Yes.
I live in Lynchburg, Virginia. There's a college here called Randolph College, and there's a professor there who teaches history courses, and he teaches a course on the Second World War. Every semester for the last 10 years, he invites me in to read my poems to his students, and I think that's why he's having me read the poems to his students, to give them a sense of something beyond what the history books tell them. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I think that also is the reason why we must straight away, invite you to read some of your poems for our audience.
Yeah. So I'm gonna read some poems, and these are poems that were in the issue of Kritya.
You can read any poem, no problem. You can read any poem. I will read one or two poem in Hindi. So if poems are different, then also no problem. You
Okay.
can.
Okay. Let me read. Can you tell me how much time I have for the reading? I don't want to be taking up too much time.
How much time? 10 minutes?
I think 10 minutes. Yes.
Okay. Okay. I want to read some poems about my father, and then a poem about my mother and her experiences in the war. My father was in Buchenwald concentration camp, and he spent 4.5 years there. And when he was finally liberated in 1945, he weighed 70 pounds. And when my mother saw him, she said he looked like two shoelaces tied together. And I remember asking my father what kept him alive, considering that in the camp, they were only given about 600 calories of food a day. And so this is a couple of poems about from a poem called Hunger in the Labor Camps. What my father ate. My father ate what he couldn't eat, what his mother taught him not to. Brown grass, small chips of wood, the dirt beneath his gray, dark fingernails. He ate the leaves off trees. He ate bark. He ate the flies that tormented the mules working in the fields. He ate what would kill a man in the normal course of his life. Leather buttons, cloth caps, anything small enough to get into his mouth. He ate roots. He ate newspaper. In his slow, clumsy hunger, he did what the birds did, picked for oats or corn or any kind of seed left by the cows in the dry dung. And when there was nothing to eat, he'd search the ground for pebbles, and they would loosen his saliva, and he would swallow that. And all the other men did the same. This is another poem from this hunger in the labor camps. It's called What a Starving Man Has. He has his skin. He has a thinness to his eyes no bread will ever redeem. He has no belly, and his long muscles stand out in relief as if they've been flayed. He is a bony mule with the hard eyes one sees in nightmares or in hell. And he dreams of cabbage and potatoes the way a young boy dreams of women's breasts. They come uncalled for, round and fevered like rain that will never stop. There's always an empty sea in his belly, rising, falling, and seeking land. And next to him, there's always another starving man who says, "Help me, brother,